It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this very, very special keynote lecture. And it's my duty and my honor to announce first the first speaker of this morning. This is Geert Binink. Let me see how it works. He finished school at 1966, and you see an image there which shows him relatively young, but you will see the original as soon. The next point is he studied physics at the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt. Then, 1978, he wrote a thesis on tunnel spectroscopy oder Tunnelspektroskopie an superleitenden SNX, very difficult thing, by the way. Then, 1981, he developed the scanning tunneling microscope, das Rastertunnelmikroskop. He was one of the fathers of this, together with Heinrich Rohrer. And he did it at the IBM research labs in Zurich. 1983, he gets the Otto Klung Award, a very prestigious award in Germany at least, for the best German junior scientist in physics. He was still very young, as you see. And 1986, he gets the Nobel Prize for Physics, together with Heinrich Rohrer and Ernst Ruschka. This was again for developing the tunnel microscope and Ruschka in particular the electron microscope several years or many years ago. And finally, and this is interesting also for the development of and the integration of these very technical and very scientific part of his life with, let me say, normal and business life. He is the founder of a company, Definiens, which is working in Munich and which is very much involved in image analysis. There are 2 points that I would like to mention. He was always interested in creativity. What is creativity and how can we describe creativity? And so one of his statements, which I read in his CV, creativity is a potency for evolution, and this can be described by fractal Darwinism. To be honest, I first have to go to Wikipedia to know what is fractal Darwinism, but maybe he will explain it to us in a second. Please come in. Herr Hahn, come in. So this is the basis, and his creativity and his idea are how you can find descriptive algorithms for procedures like evolution and creativity. A second point, and this is the reason why he's here today, he is very much interested in image analysis, and he stated, in comparison to automated image analysis systems, a human being has 2 special capacities, which at all cannot be reached by machines. One is the ability to draw context-driven conclusions. This is important, context-driven conclusions, and to include complex knowledge into these conclusions. That means we still need the human brain to understand what the image analysis systems are giving to us. And our cooperation and our friendship is based on this, in part at least. There is some personal sympathy, but in addition to this, he and we are trying to be able to measure morphological structures. You know, a histological slide, in particular when you're doing immunohistochemistry, staining this or that, estrogen receptor in breast cancer, for example, it's necessary to measure these reactions to have a reliable and reproducible result regarding the treatment of the patient. And this is a context between the necessity to understand the algorithms and the background factors of the computers. On the other way, he has to learn what is morphology, what is pathology. So this is a mixture of 2 fields, and I'm very happy that you are here, Geert. And it's a pleasure for me, and I think for all of us, to hear you.
Manfred, thank you very much for this kind of introduction. I hope you are not too disappointed when you have seen this nice picture when I was quite a bit younger than I'm today. At that time, when this picture was taken, I was working in a very different field. And maybe we can have, I have to do this, yeah, to the first slide. So it's my pleasure to be here and that the organizers give me the opportunity to talk about the thoughts I have today about image analysis in medicine and biology, and that I can show you that what you can do with this and my thoughts about what you can do with it. Yeah. So that was the time when the picture was taken. I was working on scanning tunneling microscope, co-inventing this, and there you could see the atomic structures of matter. And for me, it was always a pain in the neck that you couldn't use it in biology. So a little bit later, I invented the atomic force microscope, which can be applied to biology, and which was applied then to biology. Very pioneering work by Andreas Engels, where you can observe proteins in their natural environment in water and see how the ion channels open and close. So that was my first step into biology, and then I actually also worked a little bit in biology on living cells, because the atomic force microscope you can use in a natural environment. Before that, you only could study viruses, for instance, on cells just when they are dead in vacuum. So I went kind of a zigzag path through all these different fields, starting with my interest in biology, then AFM, inventing this, then working on biology, then working in biology, you are confronted with this huge amount of complexity, which you see. And then I got interested in this theme, worked on simulations, then did image analysis on very complex images, also a little bit based on these kind of simulations. In principle, it was a fractal Darwinism that was important here, and then went into biology and medicine, applied these technologies to do this image analysis in this area. That does not mean that I understand biology and medicine. I just work in this field. I know a little bit about image analysis, and we developed a new technique here. So going digital is certainly a big theme today for everyone, and in particular for medicine. Has a lot of different advantages, certainly. In particular, if you want to do image analysis, you have to be digital. Otherwise, you cannot process those images. They need to be digital first. For radiology, that's a given, because you would not have an image at all if you wouldn't be digital. Yeah. So there's no way to produce those images you see without processing the data. So that's for sure. It looks a little bit different in pathology, because there you don't need to digitize the images at all, because you don't need to have images at all. You just look into the microscope and look at the cell structures and the arrangements of cells and in the tissue, and you come to some conclusion. Yeah? Here, for instance, very important for cancer diagnosis. Then you can digitize those images by having a camera on top, a digital camera on top of the microscope, but that's not the state of the art. The state of the art today is that you have a scanner, which then scans the full slide. So the whole piece, if you just look in a microscope, you always see a small subsection of the tissue. Oops. So in principle, those scanners are kind of automized microscope where one picture is taken after the other and stitched together to a full picture. Some of these microscopes, they have just a linear scanner where you have a line scanning over the tissue in a continuous way, and this way generating a huge data set, actually. And if you look at such an image which you produce, compare it to what you can do with your digital camera, then it's far off. Yeah? Here you have 20 billion pixels if you go to high resolution. If you compare this with a satellite image of whole Netherlands, it's roughly the same amount of data you have there. compared to CT scans, which are actually three-dimensional. You would expect they are much bigger, but they're something like a factor of 200 less. And it's actually worse than that, because the pathologist not only has to look at one of those images for a given patient and even for a given state of the patient or a certain case, he has to look, in some cases, at many of those images, like differently stained images that give you different kind of information about the given case. So the basic staining, what you have here is that's called H&E, where you stain more or less that you see something, yeah, because these tissue slices are extremely thin and something like a few micrometers thick, and you don't have any contrast, you don't see much. But if you stain them, for instance, you stain the nuclei and the cytoplasm differently, then you can look at the morphology of the tissue and get some conclusion by the arrangement, how the cells are arranged, what is the size of the cells and their shape. You can come to some very important clinical decisions. So this is mainly for looking at the morphology of the tissue. No, that was one too fast. Then there are some clever staining techniques developed over the last years, also in the context of personalized medicine, where you look for certain proteins in the tissue, and you can stain the tissue by marking or labeling certain proteins. In principle, it's spatially resolved proteomics. You can do it for several proteins and on different tissues in this case, and you get an impression where locally are the proteins located, are they overexpressed, underexpressed, and so on. Okay, compared to normal proteomics, it's not a wide spectrum, it's just a few of the proteins. But if you know what you are looking for, it's very valuable. And here you have the advantage that you have this spatially resolved information. You can do the same with genes, which is called in situ hybridization, where you label genes. And you have the same thing here. You have a spatially resolved genomics. With fluorescent microscopy, where you can use a laser and you have maybe very well-defined frequencies of the laser, then you can have several of those labels in one and the same image at the same time. That's an advantage, but on the other hand, it's slower, more expensive, and so on than the other techniques. So what can you do actually when you now go digital? What would be the advantage? And if you look back for old system, which you all are familiar with, for instance, with a map you can hold in your hands on, which is on paper, and you bring it on the screen, what is different? If you bring it on the screen, I mean, you see the same things, yeah? Not a huge difference, but you can distribute this information around the world in an extremely high speed. So the internet makes a difference here, or any kind of network you have available makes a huge difference. But if you have some supporting intelligence and not just the viewing of this information, then you have a little bit more than that, because you do some calculations here now. For instance, you can calculate the shortest distance between A and B, and the computer tells you how to drive that to be faster, and can incorporate any kind of information you like. That would be then new. But if you then go a step further, suddenly ideas come up and a new quality arises, because you would never expect from a map which is in your car that tells you to go next to the right. That's something you would not expect from a map. So that's a new quality that suddenly appears after people get used to digitized information, then inventions will show up. And I think the same thing will happen if you use these technologies in medicine. So here's again this case where you have a microscope and human intelligence then analyzes those tissue slices, and if you digitize it, then you have it on the screen. You can propagate it over the internet or other networks. But if you add a little bit more intelligence to it, then you can, for instance, use it like the car navigation system as a tissue navigation system, for instance. So before we go into the details how that can be done, what are the advantages of a computer compared to a human? There are some things a computer can do much better than humans. And quantification is, for instance, for a computer something that's extremely fast and extremely easy. Yeah, so once the computer found relevant objects in those images, to calculate what their shape is, all the kind of features, their contrast and so on, that's in a matter of milliseconds for thousands of those objects. A human would take forever, yeah, to measure them out. So to measure these structures is absolutely fast. And also for absolute values. Humans have a very difficult time to tell this is absolutely in this certain range of contrast. A computer has no problem with that. And then certainly if you do all these calculations on those images to do statistics over it is also something that you have to take care of a huge amount of data. That's very difficult for people. So a machine can do that very nicely. And if you have these huge data sets, then searching in data sets is also something humans are really slow. A computer can do it much better, and if you can look for patterns in these structures, data structures, humans have also a problem. If the data set is big enough, we are lost. A machine can find patterns. And the reproducibility is also something that's maybe important, that you will come always to a similar result, and that the machine is really stubborn. It will look at any pixel that's in the image and it will not get distracted by something else. On the other hand, people are intelligent, and that's a big difference, and the machines will not be able to compete with this intelligence humans have in the near future. And particularly because people can take context into account, and they do it in a way that they use their knowledge. And we have knowledge in our mind computers don't have, because our knowledge is a network of knowledge, which is a very subtle and very clever network of knowledge which we learn during our life. Nobody succeeded up to now to tell a computer how to do this. So the semantics, that's a big advantage. So I give you here a quick example for how we take context into account. Here you have an object and you might guess what it is. You don't have context now. You just see the object, and it's very difficult to tell what it is. So you take a little bit more context into account, you might see a little bit more, but still difficult to see what it is. And if you see the full picture, then actually it's clear what it is. Also, it's a vague object. You realize that's a footprint. And you know much more about it because you know it's a footprint on the moon. So you get a lot of information if you see all the context, and if you just see the objects, you know nothing. Hierarchies play also a role, and also you have some combinatorial problems here, which you always have also in complex situations, where you even wouldn't know what kind of object would you start with. Yeah, what is an object here? Before you can measure the relations between the objects, you first have to find the right object, but there are so many possibilities what kind of object you might find. The same is true here for instance, nuclei. This is here a structure in the tissue. It's not so clear what is an object here, and there have many possibilities how you can structure it into objects. But if you see the full picture, then it's clear how to do this. These are nuclei, and that's their shape. And in the neighborhood, there might be an object which looks very alike, like these nuclei, but actually something very different. That's not a nucleus. It's a nucleus, but a nucleus of a different cell. It's probably inflammatory cell here in this case. The dark dot looks the same, but the structure itself has a very different meaning. So context is also here very important. And what we do, we bring these two qualities together, at least a little bit of this human intelligence into a computer by dealing with context, and then having a new kind of processing. Here's a very simple case where you use these dark dots, this chromatin densification in this huge enlarged tumor cells, and use them to grow in a certain way till they find the right nucleus. So you start with an object you might not be interested in, but you use it as a context object to find the object you are interested in. And then you can analyze also the more difficult nuclei. Yeah, what can you do if you apply a little bit of supporting intelligence to radiology? I just give one little example here. You, for instance, can analyze the objects automatically, and then, for instance, here in this case, you see all the enlarged lymph nodes, which are very important for diagnosing or evaluating the state of cancer here. So this is very important. So in one glance, you see where they are, and you can judge how big they are, and you get an impression. And then you, in principle, you could click on one of those lymph nodes you might be interested in, and you're automatically navigated to the right region that you can see it in the conventional way as well. In pathology, it might look like this. You have biopsies, then they are cut into thin slices, then they are stained intelligently with these markers, and the results will be on glass slides, and then they will be scanned, and you get the result on these huge images. The huge images can be viewed then, and navigated around, shifted around, zoom in, zoom out. But if you have a little bit of supporting intelligence, you might use it as a kind of navigation system, like the car navigation system. So if you, for instance, have here such a huge image from pathology, that's an H&E stained image, and then you have a heat map where the computer already calculated all kinds of features, but here is displayed just the size of the nuclei, and you have it in a heat map that locally the size of the nuclei is varying, and the size of the nuclei plays a very important role in grading of this tumor. So evaluating this case, the size of the nuclei play a role. And then you can click on the hotspot here, and then you directly zoom in to the regions where the nuclei are biggest. And you click on that's a classification, what the computer found, and you see a lot of blue nuclei which are evaluated as a very enlarged nuclei in this case. Then you click on the low spot where the numbers are much smaller, and you see there are much less of these blue nuclei, and you compare the two regions, cool spot and hot spot, then you can see definitely there's a difference. But you are directly guided there, and you can judge it yourself then. Another example, oh no, that's first. So these heat maps might be also very interesting in the future, because if you look here, you have for different scores, you have those heat maps, and you can see immediately with just one glance that's a very heterogeneous tumor. That's the different scores are distributed very differently, and that's something for the future. And in my opinion, that's the real meaning of personalized medicine. If you say every tumor is different, and here you can see it, that is actually the case. Every pattern for every patient will be different here. And then if you find ways to treat this in the future, then you are really in the regime of personalized medicine. So that's something for the future will not be used today. Another example for a nice way of navigating to the right regime is you have all these different stained images, and you want to look in one region and want to look in another stain to the same region. And they are all lying on the glass slide in some orientation, maybe even some are flipped around. And if now the computer can take them and align them all, flip them back if they are flipped, and put them on top of each other, then you have a nice support. If you can do that for all kinds of images, also for biopsies where it might be very much distorted. It's not just the linear rotation on shift, it's really you have to distort the images quite a bit to put all the relevant regions on top of each other. So now you might be interested in one region here. This is HER2 stained, which is important for analyzing breast cancer. And you want to see the morphology more clearly. Then you would go back to H&E stain. And if you do this, then the system navigates you directly to the right region that you compare directly, automatically. You don't have to do anything. And that is certainly something that's valuable. So when you have all these quantification, all the numbers, something else also could come into play. Because now you have certain patterns in your results. And the machine can look at those patterns. That's usually called data mining if you do this. If you correlate these data also with other kind of data, that's called data mining. And if we do it on image analysis results, some people, and also we call it image mining in this case. And you create new types of knowledge this way because you look for patterns people cannot do, because it's a huge amount of data and people cannot find any structures in those data. But the machine can do. People also think about interdependencies, and they come up with all these interesting stains. I need to look for this and that kind of protein. That's human intelligence. But here's a different type of intelligence which might come on top of the human intelligence. So what you do image analysis, and in the next step, you do image mining. So you have all these numbers which you created on, let's say, on many, many different images. And then you might have other types of data. You could correlate data from radiology with data from pathology, or you could correlate it with clinical outcome data. For instance, survival time, or whether a drug was successful or not in a certain, so the response, positive response to a drug. And if you do this, you can come to interesting conclusions. You shouldn't do it this way. Yeah, that's in many cases it's done that people do image analysis or some kind of data analysis, and then on the other side of the wall, somebody does data mining, and he on the right-hand side has no clue about what the data are about. That's not the right thing you should do. You always should come back, if you do statistics on data, you always should come back to the meaning of the data, to the original data. It should look more like this. You get all these kind of statistics and correlations, and you always can click on points in your statistical evaluation and go to the image or the image analysis result where this data point originates from. That's how it should look like. Somehow. So you put all this together into one big database, and then you might calculate this. Here, that's a case where we just did it ourselves, and that's a huge image, a TMA tissue microarray, where you have many different pieces of tissue on one of those glass slides, but at the same time you have many different patients here, because usually two of those cores, what they call cores, belong to one and the same patient, and you have a lot of different patients, and you can analyze it and can say, can I predict something here? Just by the computer looking at a tiny little piece of tissue. You analyze it, and then you do some statistics and correlation and find a formula. What kind of pattern did I find that predicts that this is a patient with a long disease-free survival time or has a short disease-free survival time. And you split it into groups, and you plot what people do a lot in medicine, these Kaplan-Meier curve, which gives you the probability to stay disease-free, actually measured then, because you have the clinical outcome data available. And then you see, did I do a good prediction or didn't I? And so what the pathologist was trying to do for HER2, to find a way to predict this for HER2. And actually he couldn't really, because with the data people are not good in that. The machine did a much better job. If you split the two curves, that means the disease for the long predicted, with a long disease-free survival time, the curve should decay much slower than for the people with a short disease-free survival time, which is the case here for the machine. And the p-value tells you something about the quality of this prediction. You can do even having slices which are much thicker and look very different contrast, and still use them as a training set, and then do a blind test on newly cut images, tissue slices, and then do a blind test and predict the disease-free survival time. And as you can see, it actually works. So the machine created new types of knowledge. How can you predict here the disease-free survival time? The last one was actually on H&E, not on HER2. And others also doing that now a lot, also with context-driven image analysis. And here there was one work in Stanford where they saw that actually in the stroma you can get features, which is to me a little bit surprising, that can tell you something about the prognosis of a patient. The holy grail here certainly would be that you predict what is the drug response. That for this one would need the right data, and we are working on that. So in the R&D environment, this already is implemented, actually. In the clinic, not yet so much. Yeah? It starts to be implemented, but it's not there yet, really. But in R&D, pharma industry, in startups, biotechs, and also in biological research, this is state of the art more and more. Yeah? Since a few years, not that long, but since a few years, that's state of the art. And I would say, yeah, you develop some concepts, you do some experiments, you create by these experiments some data, you do some image data sometimes, other data as well, but image data also, and you do then image analysis on those, create again numbers, and do the data mining and learn from this, do statistics and come to some conclusions, modify your experiment a little, and then do the loop again. So that's an engine that's already running today in a better and better fashion. You could look at this engine in the healthcare in general. Yeah. So there you have this research where I was talking about just right now. Creates knowledge which leads to new applications in the clinic, for instance. Then these applications like engines or some procedures or diagnosis or biomarkers, whatever, they create results. And the results, in principle, could be fed back into research because you learn something from those results. But this is for many of the data that's the case, but everything that's in images, and a huge portion of information is actually in images, it's not done today. Not by far, not as much as it could be done, because there's a huge amount of information in the images which is not measured because the machine didn't analyze it. And people might be a little slow for this. How much? That's enough. So creating, doing the image analysis, you create mineable data which you can fed back in then into the engine, and that's a nice effect of doing the image analysis, creating those data. Then you have the second effect that you, for a single individual person, you have more data in your hands, and you can be navigated to the right regions and so on, this navigation and quantification effect. And there's one aspect which is also, I think, important, will be more important in the future, that you fill databases this way. Because you create all this data which you didn't create beforehand. And then you might fill these databases and use it in a clinical decision support, where you have a case, you click on this case, and you find the most similar cases in your database. You only can find the most similar cases if you have rich data, where you compare, in which that they have the same pattern in this data. Only if you have rich data, you can look for the most similar case. And then you can, and these cases are validated. Yeah? You know what the outcome was. And how were they validated in this case? Again, by pathology, because there pathologists looked at the slides and found this is malignant. So that closes the circle, and then the engine can run this way. There's a little R&D engine running by itself, but there's a bigger loop where the whole healthcare engine might use all the data which are now to a certain extent lost. So I hope I could show you that image analysis could contribute here quite a bit, that data are important data getting available. Thank you very much.